I'm almost as embarrassed by the word spirituality as every other atheist. It's not, I'm not comfortable with my use of it. The problem is, and this is a problem you almost never encounter in English, we just don't have a good word for this domain. We just do not have a good word for the project of taking seriously the notion that you could become like Jesus or become like the Buddha or become someone who inhabits the far end of the positive side of the continuum of human psychology and human well-being, and someone who can have really radical insights into the nature of consciousness by virtue of a disciplined practice like meditation. So to talk about things like awe and well-being and love and positive psychology and happiness, that doesn't get at how deep and rarefied this project can be. It also doesn't link it to the traditional context in which people have pursued similar projects. So there's a point of contact between what I'm talking about and what a Tibetan Lama is doing in a cave for 5 years. I mean, it's very explicit. Most of these teachings come out of traditions like Buddhism. So while I argue that we have to get out of the religion business and the doctrines that have framed most people's discussion of these experiences are unwarranted, as I've always said, there is no alternative term for the efforts that people can make through meditation or some other means to really transform their consciousness and have insight into its intrinsic selfless nature.
One of the great disciples or enlightened disciples of Ramana Maharshi, I used to go and see him around the age of 10. He's a very nice elderly person. He was sitting and talking to the group of seekers. He was telling that we are not body and we are beyond suffering and pain and all those things. Naturally, I was not able to understand. How can he say that we are beyond suffering? If my mother beats me, I have pain. If my teacher shouts at me, I have a suffering. How can he say that we are beyond pain and suffering? Anyhow, I just did not leave that. Went home and took a knife and just cut my thigh to see whether I really have pain or not. Of course, there was pain. And I was taken to hospital. Doctor did all the first aid and everything. After a few days, again I went back to him, asked him, what is this? What have you taught? See, you said that we will not have pain and suffering. I went and cut myself and now I have pain. I have suffering. It was very deep cut. 13 stitches in those days. And 13 stitches is too much for a 10-year-old boy. And he was smiling at me and he said, my son, just try to find the source from where you are feeling the pain, point in which you are feeling the pain. Try to find the source. Do this meditation. Even after he taught the meditation, I was not completely convinced. I told him, it's okay, you have given me you have given me blessing or initiation or meditation. You could have done this before I cut my thigh. You could have done this earlier. Why did you make me cut my thigh and then talk all these things? He said that don't bother my son. Don't bother about this pain. Your courage to experiment with the truth will liberate you. That is enough. We'll take care. Don't bother. So it was a big inspiration. I said, all right, let me at least now do the meditation anyhow. Cutting is over. Let me at least do the meditation. I used to play with the technique. I'll just sit and see from where the pain is coming, or where that I am feeling that I. Whenever I find time, I will just sit and play with this technique, not even seriously, just very casually, trying to find the source of the self. Not even as a meditation, just as a casually. Don't know what will be the end of the meditation and all those things. What will be the result of what I am doing also. Just because he said, let us do, that's all. No idea exactly what will happen if I do this meditation. Anyhow, started playing with the technique very casually, and one day, of course, the same day, second Tamil month, Purnima, Vaikasi is the month, Purnima, full moon day, evening, same time, around 4:30 to 6:30, maybe you can say this is the Sandhya time, when the sun sets and moon rises. Of course, I was not aware that today, the day was Purnima and all those things. I was just sitting on a rock in the Arunachala hill, trying very casually, sitting and trying to find the source from where that I is rising, that feeling of I is happening. That day I was sitting for quite a long time, don't know why I was sitting on all those things, just was sitting and trying to find the source in a deep way. Suddenly something happened, like I am being sucked inside, pulled inside, just I was being sucked inside. I was sitting with closed eyes, but I saw very clearly something opened inside. The moment that opened inside, I was able to see whole 360 degree without opening my eyes. My eyes was closed, but I was able to see complete 360 degree. Whatever was happening in the front, side, back, side, and up, down, all the direction. Not only I was able to see, I was able to feel clearly how much you all are alive inside your skin. How much you all are alive. We are all alive inside our skin. We can feel we are living inside our skin. Same way, same intensity, I was able to feel I am alive in everything I was able to see. Understand? I was able to see the whole thing, whatever was around me, the plants, rock, tree, everything. And I was able to feel that I am alive in everything. How I feel, how you all feel you are alive inside your body, same way I felt alive with the whole cosmos, with the whole existence.
One afternoon, I just went and sat on a small hill, which was in a town where I grew up. Till that moment, I always thought, this is me and that's somebody else. I had no issue with that somebody else, but that is somebody, this is me. For the first time, I did not know which is me and which is not me. What was me was just spread all over the place. I thought this madness lasted for 5–10 minutes, but when I came back to my normal ways of being, 4.5 hours had passed. I'm sitting right there, fully conscious, eyes open. I sat there around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, it's 7:30 in the evening, sun has set, and I thought it's only 10 minutes, but 4.5 hours had passed. For the first time in my adult life, tears were flowing to a point where my shirt is completely wet. Me and tears were impossible, I'm like this. I've always been happy, that's never been an issue for me. I was successful with what I was doing, I was young and no problems. I was fine. but I'm bursting with another kind of ecstasy which is indescribable. Every cell in my body is just bursting with ecstasy. I had no words. When I shook my head and tried to ask my skeptical mind, okay, what's happening to me? The only thing that my mind could tell me was, maybe you're going off your rocker. I didn't care what it was, but I didn't want to lose it, because this is the most beautiful thing that I had ever touched, and I had never imagined that a human being could ever feel like this within himself. So when I went to my closest friends and said, see, something is happening to me like this, as I'm talking, tears would flow, and people would say, did you drink something? Did you pop something? What did you do? I knew there was no point talking to anybody, because if I just look at the sky, tears will come, if I look at a tree, tears will come, if I close my eyes, tears will come. I'm just bursting. In 6 weeks' time, everything about me changed so dramatically. And I just lost the sense of time. The next time this happened was very significant because there were people around me. I went and sat with my family at the dinner table. I actually thought it's 2 minutes, but 7 hours had gone by. I'm sitting right there, fully alert, but I have no sense of time. This happened many times. One day I'm just sitting in my farm and I thought I sat there for about 25–30 minutes, but I have sat there for 13 days. By then a crowd has gathered, India being what it is, there are huge garlands all around me. Somebody is asking how to run his business, somebody wants to know when his daughters will get married. All the nonsense I hated just happening around me. And I actually thought it's only 25–30 minutes, but these people saying 13 days, he's sitting, he's in samadhi, he's this, that. I had not even heard these words. I grew up on, European philosophy, Camus, Kafka, Dostoevsky. You read that stuff in America? Huh? And being 60s, Beatles and this and that, I grew up like that. Me and spirituality are another world, there's no chance of me going there. So I had none of these vocabulary, samadhi, this, that stuff in me. People are saying, oh, he's in this kind of samadhi, he's in that kind of samadhi, you touch him, this will happen, and people are trying to grab me. So the only thing that I could do was leave the place and travel out, just to escape this, because I couldn't figure what's happening around me. Why I'm telling you this story is, this is possible for every human being. It's my wish and my blessing. This must happen to you. Whether you climb Mount Everest or not, whether you become the richest man on this planet or not, your experience of life on this planet should be pleasant. You must live blissfully and go. That must happen to every human being. Everybody deserves it and everybody is capable of it.
I'd had what a lot of people would call spiritual or mystical experiences from the time I can remember. Although I didn't think of them that way. I think children don't think of them as spiritual or mystical or unusual. They were just sort of things that would occasionally happen. And so I think when I meditated, it was almost like a time of remembering.
That you had had those experiences?
That I'd had them. And I had had them actually all the way, in some sense or another, almost all the way up to that time that I started to just meditate. I had actually been having certain experiences periodically. I used to call them, as I got older into junior high school and high school, I used to call them one of those days. And it was one of those days where I would wake up and everything would just be different. I would walk around kind of really not knowing who I am, or almost like the identity had dropped away. And I just felt like, almost like emptiness looking through my own eyeballs and feeling this incredible intimacy or oneness with everything around me. I didn't even think of it as spiritual or mystical or anything like that. I literally just would say to myself, oh, here's one of those days. And all I would do on those days is just, I started to realized I had to be a little bit careful of how I looked at people, because the tendency was to stare at them very sort of profoundly and very deeply, almost like I could see the mystery that I was experiencing reflected in them. And so there was this tendency to sort of just stare at them and like, what's really going on? So it was very interesting. And that was kind of, I think that kind of got stimulated in a whole new way when I started to meditate.
And then there was this day where you were sitting, trying to calm your mind down. And what happened?
Well, the first time when I was 25, it was my first opening.
Yes.
And strangely enough, for the 5 or 6 years before that, I had had this intuition, very clear intuition, that I was going to die at 25 years old. And I thought it was going to be physical death. What else could you assume?
Yes.
The strange thing is, again, in retrospect, it never concerned me whatsoever. It was like a piece of information that was given to me, and my mind made nothing out of it. It was just like a fact. And I didn't have any relationship other than it was a fact, and somehow I knew it was going to be true. So fast forward, 25 years old, and I sit down to meditate, and I was really, really intentionally trying to have this breakthrough for a long time. I would walk the sidewalk, the streets going to work, and I would literally have this mantra in my head, like, what is this? What is this? What is this? Because I felt like I had something inside of me, this intensity, this thing that wanted to be known. And it was almost like I got invaded by it, is how it felt. Like something came inside.
You were possessed.
That's what it felt like. And I would just literally, in my mind, what is this? What is this? What is this? All day long. And I used to think, I wonder what day I'll actually have some sort of psychotic break or psychological breakdown, because I knew that I couldn't sustain that intensity indefinitely. So I used to think about that. So anyway, one day I have this real intensity, and I sit down to meditate, and I just have this feeling of, this is it. I'm really going to somehow do it. And I sat down, it was like all my will just focused. Within a couple of minutes, I focused like I'd never focused. And right at that moment, I had an insight, which was, I can't do this.
Yeah.
It wasn't a great insight. It was like complete defeat. Just utter, devastating defeat. Like, not only can I not do this, this will never happen. I'm defeated. And as soon as I had that sense, I'm defeated, I cannot do this. This immense sort of opening.
So when you
happened.
said, I cannot do that anymore, meaning the meditation,
the whole thing.
the whole thing,
The spiritual search, the enlightenment, the whole project. I just met like this wall that I've been pushing and pushing and pushing on.
Yeah.
And I was defeated by it. Intellectually, emotionally, physically even, energetically, I was just completely defeated.
So.
And as soon as I was defeated, in the next instant, it started out as an energetic thing. I guess they would call it nowadays a Kundalini experience. Do you know? And I felt this immense rush of energy and started breathing quite heavily, and my heart started to
Were you on your own?
I'm just sitting there meditating in my little meditation hut in my parents' backyard.
Yeah.
And having been an athlete, I knew what my maximum heart rate felt like. I knew what a heart rate of around 200 felt like. And my heart was beating way faster than that. And there was so much energy, the heart was beating, it felt like my heart was going to explode. I was breathing hard, and yet I'm sitting there meditating, you know. I can't move. And I just had a thought, this is going to kill me. And the next thought I had, when I knew it was going to kill me, the next thought I had was, if that's what it takes, let's get it over with. And it wasn't like a courageous thought. It wasn't, you know, like a masculine, fearless, okay, I'll do it. It was just a very simple, okay, I'll die. I'll die right here, right now, I'll let my heart explode. I won't move off this cushion. I won't go anywhere. And I really thought I was going to die, 100%. As soon as I thought, okay, I'll die now, all of a sudden I was instantly in a different, I don't even know what to call it, different dimension. I wasn't aware of my body anymore. Absolute darkness, total infinity of black. And I wasn't even there anymore. It was just this infinite, open, sort of black space. And after a while, what I could feel is there was like these insights coming, almost being downloaded through the top of my head into my body.
Yeah.
Like a computer program was being downloaded.
And what was the insights? Could you differentiate the information?
I couldn't. They were coming like 100 a second. Just way too many for me to have any conscious, but I knew they were insights. Just like, if you can imagine ahas going off like a popcorn popper. But so quickly you couldn't stop to really recognize what you just realized. And so there was this downloading of almost like information and ahas. And then, then slowly, after some time, I don't know how long, I became more aware of my body. And the energy had settled, everything settled, and after a while, I was just sitting there. Totally normal. Absolutely no high, no low, no, it just all just, and I'm just sitting there. And I think, well, there's nothing left to do. I guess I'll get up. And I got up and
You didn't have any afterthoughts?
Not at that moment.
What this blackness was?
Not at that instant. It was just so, looking back, it's almost strange. I didn't have these, I just thought, well, I guess I'll get up, and I got up and I turned and I did the bows and I bowed to my Buddha statue figure that I was always there with the incense lit, and I bowed down, and by the time I got my head back up, I was just laughing hysterically. And I just looked at that Buddha and I thought, I've been chasing you for years. And I could see that which I had been chasing was this that was chasing it. I didn't have any more definition than that. That was of what that was, what I was, what I'd been chasing, but I knew that what I had been chasing was what I am. And that's where the laughter came from. Just laughed and laughed and laughed.
The light now continues to stream into my brain from all parts of the body, drawn through the spinal cord. It seems as if a subtle radiation about which science has no knowledge at this time is gathered by the nerves and brought into the central canal, where it flows like a stream into the cranium. And there it expands my consciousness to the same extent as happened on the very first day. What has been taught to me in the course of this long experience is that our body is really a temple, that the spirit in us wishes to manifest itself. But this manifestation cannot be possible until the body and the brain is brought to the necessary degree of perfection to allow this manifestation to occur. This degree of perfection includes the opening of a subtle and silent zone in the brain, and also the arousal of a power and the upflow of a radiant energy into the brain. With the arousal of this power, a stream of silvery energy rushes up the spine and reaches the brain, and it is this energy which causes the expansion of consciousness. In fact, the brain is now fed with a more powerful energy than before, many times more powerful, which causes it to become luminous and to create a luminosity all around it. I would interpret it in this way, that the brain now becomes attuned to be responsive to another plane of creation. The brain is now able to interpret vibrations coming from a subtler plane than the earthly plane to which we are accustomed. And it is this subtler plane which is radiant, which is conscious, which is living, and which is intelligent. In other words, it means that with the opening of this center and the rising of this energy, man is now able to perceive the world of consciousness. Formerly he was perceiving the world of matter through his senses, but now through his own consciousness he is able to perceive the whole world of intelligence. According to my own experience, and also according to the study I have made of the various scriptures, it appears to me that this experience of God or cosmic consciousness is actually an experience of a higher form of consciousness towards which mankind is evolving at present. In other words, what I mean to say is that just as man climbed from the state of an animal to that of a man, rich with wisdom and knowledge and ethics which do not exist in the animal kingdom, he has to take another leap to reach a higher dimension of consciousness where he can perceive the creative energies of the universe.
So make a note to review that dream journal and look at those dreams, and always look at them within a Kundalini context. What is the Shakti Kundalini telling me now? What is Shiva telling me now? What is Christ telling me now? What is Mary telling me now? What is Buddha telling me now? What is the red serpent energy communicating to me now? How should I sculpt my life, my Kundalini awakening life, around these teachings? Pay attention to these things. These are very, very real communications. I myself may come to you in your dream state. You may see Chrism coming to you, and, you know, in various description and disguise or clothing or attribute or characteristic. This is the Shakti using Chrism as a teacher to come to you in your dream state. Welcome this person. Even if, you know, the Chrism has glowing red eyes, which typically occurs around 4 a.m. if I'm still awake, you know, my eyes get kind of red. Or if there's a lot of incense blowing in my face. You know, regardless of the characteristic, pay attention to these dream teachings. They are real. They are applicable to your Kundalini situation. There is no such thing as just a dream anymore within the Kundalini awakening process. Every dream, every memory, every action has meaning for you, has a Kundalini signature upon it. So know this, recognize this, and validate this in your life, day or night. Thanks for listening and watching. Realize that with the Kundalini awakening equation upon you, you are going to be different than the person standing next to you in the grocery store line. Okay? You're going to be different. And it's okay. Look at everybody around you. Who looks exactly like you? Nobody. Who thinks exactly like you do? Nobody. You know, so in very real ways, we are already isolated from each other just by virtue of our physical expression, our mental expression, our emotional expressions, our psychological expression. You know, the karmas that we come into this life with provide us, you know, a very distinct, unique flavor, you know, for us to express through the body. Our karmas are all different. So in a sense, you are also the same with Kundalini awakening, because everybody has Kundalini at the base of their spine. They have all the equipment for the Kundalini awakening experience. They just haven't reached the point where they're able to come into this quality of refinement yet. They will. Everybody will. Okay, it's, you know, that is the end product for this physical existence, is the Kundalini bridge being built into the next expression, so that you're in a body and you can either take that body with you, you know, into your next expression, or you can have the next expression and the physical expression at the same time, which is what I have. Okay, you have that too. You have that to look forward to. It's interesting. You walk in both worlds at the same time. You are dual and non-dual at the same time. Look at duality and non-duality as the base of a triangle, and look at Kundalini being the tip of that triangle, where you become both at the same time. You are the one that is two and the two that are one. Okay? You understand? You may feel alone, and in some ways you are. Shakti is always with you. Shiva is always with you. Sacred male, sacred female are always with you. God is always with you. You have guidance from areas that you know not yet, but you will see them as your eyelids are slowly, gently removed from your spiritual eyesight.
When I sat in front of Papaji, and the words from him really came through, because my mind didn't want to hear what he was saying. He was speaking and something inside was going, I was looking and he was, I could, because something was caught, and all my resistance, which I was not expecting, I thought I was well past that. Resistance. And I mean, outwardly I looked quite cool and everything. But inside was a riot. I was not enjoying it at all. Because mind doesn't want to hear. It's like the mind is... It wasn't funny, I'm laughing now. But something seeped through, and he say, if you wish to find the truth, you must vanish. If you want to find the truth, you must disappear. And I don't know what that did. But in my mind, I said, okay, that's it. That's it. I've got what I needed to come here for. This is a big trip. All these people are wasting their time. This guy doesn't know what he's talking about. That was my... And so I decided on that day, that's it. I've spent long enough in this place. Luck now became bad luck now. I was not interested. I'm out of here. I start to pack my bags to go. But the serum was in. It was already in. And in 1 second, something, everything I thought that my mind, the world my mind had made up, vanished in an instant. And the one I thought I was not there. Who is up for that? See? Yes. So that was the offending article, the offending factor, you see. The one who is searching is in its own way. Master's grace slapped him out. In that moment, there was not, before that, there was no feeling of gratitude and so on, so on, so easy. It was like, you know, he made me feel ashamed. He exposed me in front of all these people and all of this. Me. But the serum was in. And it was only a question of time. Yes. The delusion couldn't stay. It was deeply unhappy. There was no compost for it to grow anymore. And in an instant, it is gone. So this one who is talking and suffering, and I don't know how much longer I can go, does not exist. It never existed. It's only apparent. A dream. You are here. You are, for sure. Beyond this dream, because it was discovered when I said I could not find myself. I could not find the context that lived in me as who I am. The reference for the person could not be found. Even though I was looking at my hand like this. But it was seen that there's nobody in them. I don't know if you understand what that means. You see, there was no feeling of who it is. And yet, I am here, but not in the old sense. You without you. Just an immensity. An immensity. All the senses were working. I could see the traffic moving on the road. But there was a silence about everything. I was like I was inside a vast universe. But I was all of it. But seeing all of it from a kind of here-ness. And the one who will be complaining and saying this and saying that, well, not to mention. That was not in my consciousness at that moment. Only I saw Papaji everywhere. Whereas before, something was keeping a little bit a hand on the chest, like, not so close.
I returned to my meditation. It felt really good and natural to keep my eyes pointed here, close my eyes, and then turn my eyes within. And there started coming in light where I was focusing. There was starting to come in a trickle of light, and I had to split the session where I was asked, "Do you want this?" And I'm very curious. I'm very, very curious person. So, yeah, of course. What is this? What's happening within me? I don't know. So I said yes. And as I did so, I basically felt as if my whole forehead, like if there was a great eyelid across my forehead, and I felt it opening up. And as it opened up, there was light, pure light. My whole vision turned into white light. And then it sort of, my whole skull opened up. And it was as if I was sitting in a waterfall of pure light. Like the pressure was as if sitting underneath a waterfall, and it was pure bliss, love, pleasure. It was the most pleasurable experience that I've ever experienced. And I remember like looking down or feeling down into my body, and it was pure energy. And I was more alive than I've ever experienced. I knew I was eternal. And I've known since then that I am eternal, that I will never die, nor will you. We are eternal beings of light, and that's what I experienced. Everything changed. That feeling of being pure energy, of just being energy, was what I've experienced since. It was a complete transformation. And I also discovered that I could feel what other people felt inside, and that I could move their energy, that I could heal. And that's the strong guidance that kept coming, was heal. I asked, what am I supposed to do? Heal. What do you want me to do? Heal. So it took me some time to step out and come out as a healer, and also understand what I was doing. Not just from an intuitive sense, but scientifically, to understand what had happened with me. And my entire energy body or light body was activated in this awakening. And that's it. That's my Kundalini awakening.
So I will begin with relating some of my spiritual experiences in order to give you an idea of my development. Spiritual experiences. Although not born in India, or even to parents who studied the tantric sciences, I was born a yogi, and my experiences began as a young child. For example, my mother tells me that I chanted Om in my sleep several times as a young girl, and I also had an out-of-body experience when I was 3 years old. At around 9 years old, I went with my entire family to a New Age Christian church where we did guided meditations, much like Yoga Nidra, for 30 minutes. We went regularly for several years, and I developed the techniques of meditation quite young. When I was 19, I began to do intense meditation for several months, which eventually culminated in a form of nirbija samadhi. My consciousness expanded to the boundaries of the physical universe. I was other people and places, blades of grass, stars, and all of time. As I reached the boundaries of the universe, I understood that I had the option of completely releasing my physical body and ascending to the higher realms, which would have led to Mahasamadhi. However, I understood that I had unfinished business on earth, and I reassumed the form of Alix, gasping for air, my body jolting forward. Over the next few years, I underwent a series of huge transformations, which very early on led me to discover yoga. I practiced always alone at home for hours at a time, and I included fasting for extended periods of time.
And I was just playing with this really fascinating state of consciousness. Before I could really figure out what to do, I came back in the body and began to feel the energy subsiding, but I knew something had changed. I knew that something very profound had taken place and that this was the beginning of something new. So after that, whenever I would lay down to go to sleep, I would feel these sensations of energy come into my body, and it's like the second body or the spiritual body or energy body would be separated from the physical level of my vibration, and I would find myself floating in the room. It took me a while before I really figured out how to move, how to project myself. But after maybe 10 or 15 times of having this happen, I began to send out a signal for guides to teach me and ask for instructions for how I could learn how to move and project and explore. So this unfolded from there, and I began to experience new knowledge showing up that gave me more freedom with how to move my consciousness. I don't know exactly where this came from. It must have come from guides, but they were invisible to me at the time. I remember one specific experience where I decided to go check up on my grandmother, who was probably 20 miles away. And after I found myself floating above my body, I projected to her house, and I wanted to just see how she was doing. And while I was there, there was another being that showed up, a guide. And this woman began to speak to me. I could tell that she was also a non-physical being. She was not like my grandmother, who was there in the room as a physical person. And this woman said that she was a spiritual guide of mine, and that she also had a physical body on the physical plane, and that I would soon meet her. 2 weeks later, very synchronistically, I met this woman and had lunch with her. And I told her that I had this experience where I saw her clearly. I saw her face during this out-of-body experience, and she said she was a spiritual guide of mine. And she said, yes, I've been watching over you for 12 years. And I was amazed. I asked her what she knew about me, and she began to describe things about my awakening and my experience that made it clear to me that she had spiritual abilities. And she began to give me instructions and ideas and information about my potential that gave me a whole new window of opportunity for choosing what wanted to happen next. And what wanted to happen next was nothing short of miraculous. I began to experience a very synchronistic blending of what was happening in the out-of-body state and the synchronicities that were unfolding during my life, so that I could see that not only was the inner plane real, and the things I was experiencing were absolutely real on another layer of reality, but they were very interconnected with the unfoldment of our spiritual development in the physical. So what happened next is a long story. There's so much to share about this. But what I can tell you is that over many years, I used this ability to travel out of body to answer questions about life, about the existence of things that are mysterious or still in the realm of the imagination or the unknown. Just about anything you can imagine that's spiritual or paranormal or having to do with unsolved mysteries, strange phenomena, things about humanity's ancient past, the potentials of the future. I began to travel out of body and to travel literally in time to see these things and to directly witness things that answered these questions. So a lot of what I'm going to be sharing with you is related to this. I'm going to be sharing with you the answers that I received, and yet I am by no means limited to any of the things that I have seen, because it just keeps unraveling, it just keeps unfolding. whatever we think that we know, whatever we see in any given moment, whatever formulates our big picture, is just a stepping stone to something even more vast. And so that journey for me is, and has been for some time, a journey of constantly becoming a blank slate and moving into the not knowing and letting go of everything I thought I knew before so that new knowledge can flood in.
Go ahead. What is God?
Okay, so a lot of people think God is, quite in the biblical sense, a guy sitting up on a cloud who controls the universe, frankly, and has created all life. But my definition of God is not like that. I don't believe God is a person or entity. God is just another form of energy. Well, actually is energy. Himself, well, not even himself, itself.
Before, when we were talking about infinity and different universes, and so we've kind of identified God. God is energy, right? All the energy in the universe, that's God. It's not a guy in the sky, it's energy.
Energy isn't something that you just have. Energy is all and can be. Not all the energy in the universe, it's energy. Energy happens to consume the entire universe and every other parallel dimension or universe that can ever exist in our dimensional reality.
So what happens after we die?
I don't know. Our bodies rot in the ground. The end.
But do we continue in some way? Is there reincarnation?
Well, we know that we obtain consciousness, or, I think, therefore I am, right? I think, therefore I am, right? Well, we must have some sort of energy force to do that. Some people say it's neurons, but if we look at consciousness more, we understand that it really is an energy. And energy cannot be created nor destroyed. And energy cannot be created nor destroyed, only transferred from form to form. So it's, I guess, has some feasibility to it, but I don't know.
Let's take an example. Well, actually, I'll give you a real life example. In fact, it was almost the very first time this happened for me. I was sitting with Francis in his home in Northern California then, and we were having a conversation about non-duality, and I don't remember exactly what it was. And I remember at the time hearing a dog barking, and it was a distant sound of a dog, and immediately a thought came up. That's the sound of a dog barking, and the dog is in the distance on the other side of the valley. So somehow this was relevant to the context of the conversation, and I said to him, but it's so obvious to me that that dog is on the other side of the valley. and I said to him, but it's so obvious to me that that dog is on the other side of the valley. It's so obvious that the sound is it's at a distance from myself, and it's made out of something other than myself. It's a dog barking, it's not me. And I remember at the time, I must have been sitting on the floor, he said, place your hands on the carpet.
Mm-hmm.
So I just went like this, and actually I shut my eyes,
Mm-hmm.
I remember, and he said, place your hands on the carpet, and I placed my hands on the carpet, and then he just said, where does that sensation take place? And it was just so obvious at that moment that the sensation took place inside me. That the sensation was not at a distance from me, it wasn't made out of something other than myself. All that was present was the experience of sensing.
Mm-hmm.
And sensing takes place in me, not in me, a body and a mind, but in this open, empty, aware presence. And if I look inside that experience of sensing and find out what is there, what is it made of, awareness is the only substance present there. For it to be made of. It just became so clear experientially. It was experiential before it was rationalized. Mm-hmm. It was just so obvious that this sensation was taking place inside me, so to speak, and not only inside me, but made out of myself. So this, and that was the end of it. That was the end of the conversation. But this, it was like a key. Suddenly, I reasoned with myself, if this is true of what I thought was this carpet, this dead, inert material called the carpet, it must be true of everything. So then I would, wherever I went, I'd go out on the streets and I'd be looking at cars and people and houses, and I realized all I know of these so-called cars and people and houses is the experience of seeing and hearing. Where does seeing take place? Does it take place 10 meters away from myself, or 2 meters, or 20 meters? When I look at the moon, all I know of the moon is the experience of seeing. Does it take place at 1,000,000 miles from myself, or is it intimate, close, made only out of myself? It just became so obvious that wherever I looked, wherever I turned, all I knew was the experience of experiencing. That was all I ever know, is experiencing, and all experiencing is pervaded by the knowing of it. And I am that knowingness, that awareness. It pervades all experience intimately. So it just became clear to me at a very experiential level, long before I was able to rationalize it in the way I'm doing now, that all that is ever known is experience. And I, the knowing element in all experience, pervade all experience intimately. In fact, even that is not true, because I'm suggesting that there are two things, one called experience and another called myself, and that they somehow pervade each other. It's not even that. All there is, all we know, is the knowing of our experience, and that is what I am. That is what I-awareness is, this pure knowingness, which is the substance of all experience.
first of all, it's also described as liberation, as self-realization, as God-realization. And there are some masters who say those are all different. So, but again, I don't want to get into all the headiness of all that. Let's just, for sake of ease, let's call them all the same. It's when you're in the full experience, knowingness, isness, which people call realization, though even many people think realization means intellect. But realization means realized as in you are living as it. You are living it, self, the isness of it. That there is the knowingness, the isness in every cell of my being, that I and my Creator are one, that I am not separate, never was, and never will be again. That I'm created in God's image, and I am all that God is, I am. And I also describe enlightenment as the dissolution of the self. Every cell that is occupied by the self is one less cell that can be occupied by God. So all within us that is selfish, and I mean that in the highest sense, focused on the self, wants, needs, desires, well, let's say wants and desires, that's all focused on the self, which is empirically selfish. So every cell that is occupied by the self is one less cell that can be occupied by God. Therefore, the dissolution of the self, when you are living in selflessness, if there's no separate self living and running you, then all that can be running you is God, which is your original creation essence. I also describe it in a way of saying that I use this expression like the 50-yard line, when the collective critical mass within one's own consciousness. Being molested by my mic here. Ones who are living in the experience of separation from God, in the realm of duality or separation, more than 50% of their consciousness is fear-based. This is the easiest way I can describe liberation, and the most clear, which means because the critical mass of an individual's consciousness is anchored and rooted in fear, there is a gravity of fear that holds one in fear. Now, even ones who are living in that experience can have moments of bliss, very extended, if they receive darshan or shaktipat or have an epiphany or have an encounter with a being, or even just in the dream time or in meditation or through sacred breathing, or all the many ways they happen. People can have moments of bliss, moments of that, what people call the oneness. I was everything, I knew everything, I was God. And at some point, it's going to end, because the critical mass of that person's consciousness is fear-based. And the gravity called fear pulls that person back in, and they're in fear again, even though they may not think it or call it fear. One who is liberated, the critical mass, anywhere from 50 plus decimal point up to 100%, that life, that consciousness on earth is anchored in unconditional love. Now, this is what's interesting. Enlightened people can still get angry, still have fears, can still have initiations, and do. However, because they've crossed this critical mass, like the 100th monkey principle within their own consciousness, they're anchored in love. So even independent of anything they do, that consciousness of love is the gravity that now binds them in their incarnation and will pull them back out of it. And of course, whatever facilities and skills they use make it happen more gracefully, more quickly, more easily. But even if they did nothing, they'd be pulled back into it because they've crossed that line. The gravity that holds them on earth now is now love-based. Whereas one who is not liberated itself, the gravity which holds it and binds it in its human form on earth is fear-based. And that's why when people have those bliss experiences, they often get angry or devastated when it ends, because they say, oh, why did that happen? Well, because you haven't saturated your consciousness with enough of that. You keep having more and more of those and keep becoming very, very devoted and have very exacting discipline and practice with the different things you can learn. And there are many, many tools, given by many, many different people. The more you practice that, you'll have more and more of those experiences. They'll last longer, and then you'll have the troughs will become shallower. you know, and the distance between the crests of the wave will become shorter, and eventually you reach that point. And then beyond that, as I said, it keeps going. You keep constantly looking to become greater and greater love, and seeing how I can keep cutting that distance, you know, and being more and more love in all that I can be.
Well, I think we'll start. So Eckhart and I had a wonderful pre-talk conversation. One of the things we were talking about was, one of the things I was saying I was interested in is what happens in people's lives that lead to changes or transformations. And I was going to ask Eckhart to maybe tell us about what it was in your own life, or a little background about your life that resulted in ultimately, if you will, a transformation or a great insight.
Well, unhappiness, basically, intense unhappiness, sometimes called depression, anxiety, periods of anxiety, depressions, throughout my 20s, and even in childhood I was already predominantly unhappy. I remember when we lived in a 3 or 4 story building, and when they were painting the outside of the building, they built a scaffolding. I was about 6, and I thought, oh, we lived on the ground floor. So, well, as long as there's a scaffolding, I have no problem. Whenever I want to commit suicide, I can just climb up and jump down. So I'll be okay as long as the scaffolding is there. That's my way out. That shows the degree of unhappiness. And then at 29, it became more and more acute. And one night the thought came into my head. I describe it very briefly at the beginning of The Power of Now. In the middle of the night, I can't live with myself any longer. There was such intense unhappiness, and the depression, it was just too much to take. At that moment, an inner separation happened. I couldn't have explained exactly at that time, but retrospectively I can explain now what happened because I understand it. I didn't then. An inner separation happened between the unhappy self and a deeper sense of I or beingness, which I now call consciousness itself. So I had been identified throughout my life with an unhappy mind-made entity consisting of self-images and ideas and self-talk in the mind. It's the self-talk that most people are familiar with, but in my case it was particularly destructive and unpleasant. But everybody is familiar with the self-talk in the head. I sometimes call it the voice in the head, which are quite simply the automatic, compulsive, one could say, thought processes that never stop, that either comment on your sense perception, whatever is happening around you, a running commentary. You might recognize that, it might be familiar to you. If you don't recognize it, then you're so identified with it that you don't even know that you have a running commentary on your life. You have become the running commentary in your life. In other words, that, as happened to me, become totally identified with the compulsive thinking that never stopped. That voice in the head that in my case was predominantly negative, and so the emotions that then I felt continuously were the reflection of the predominantly negative self-talk about myself, about other people, about the situation I found myself in. There was ample justification for negative self-talk because I was struggling, I didn't have enough money, I was trying to prove myself, working too hard, had problems with, couldn't find a girlfriend, was too shy, all kinds of twisted up inside. And so I basically, there was this unhappy me, but at that night I disidentified from it and stood back from it, so to speak. And I suddenly thought, this thought that came to my head, I can't live with myself any longer. There was a stepping back from the thought, and I thought, are there two of me or one? What does that mean? I can't live with myself. Who am I, and who or what is that self that I cannot live with? Then that thought brought about the separation, and then there was an I, and then this unhappy me was somehow recognized as not real. But at that time I couldn't have explained it. It was this very strange experience. All I can say is the next morning I woke up feeling totally at peace. Then the thought came as I was lying in bed that the burden of living was too much. I didn't want to do it anymore. I can't, and so the thought arose, I can't live with myself any longer. That thought repeated itself a few times, and then a moment came when I became aware of that thought as a thought. And the thought then said, is that I can't live with myself? What does that mean? There must be two of myself here, because if I can't live with myself, who am I and who is the self? There was a sudden, I was looking at that statement that my mind had created, I can't live with myself, and I saw the strangeness of it. I had separated myself in two, and so I saw, who am I and who is the self? And that question, that was the last thought, the last significant thought before the awakening experience. This last significant thought posed a question, and then that question was, who am I and who is that self that I can't live with? Is there one or two here? Am I one or two? That was the last thought. And the answer to that question did not come as a thought. The answer to that question, I didn't know at the time, by the way, that this is what was happening, but I can explain it now. I couldn't have explained it then. The answer to that question came not as a thought, but as an inner stepping back from thought, an inner disidentification from thought. And so I suddenly realized, but not through analytical thinking, that that self that I couldn't live with had no actual reality. That was the unhappy self. So its illusory nature was recognized, but not through thinking, the self is really illusory. No, the illusory nature was recognized as in direct recognition beyond thought. I could see that it is nothing, but without saying that mentally. So, am I one or two? The last question led to a disidentification from the me, the unhappy me, the whole sense of self that was burdened with unhappiness and fear and anxiety and inadequacy and so on. So that self kind of dissolved, that because I must have withdrawn completely my identification with it. So I stepped out of the mind-created self, and what remained was myself as consciousness, but not as the unhappy me. And so the unhappy me began to get shaky, and then something happened to it. It must have, in its final stages, I think there was I felt almost disappearing into some black hole, because it was a kind of death experience. It was the death of the unhappy me. And so the perception of that, it wasn't so much visual as more like a feeling that I was disappearing into some hole. And there was still some fear left there, anxiety of what's happening to me. And then, but I heard a voice, again, not as an audible voice, but more as a realization, don't resist, or resist nothing, I think it said. And so I just let go, and then a kind of void opened, but not a visual one. And I don't remember much else. I must have gone to sleep soon after that. So there was am I one or two was the question that arose. I can't live with myself. That question brought about an inner separation between the mind-created self and the consciousness that had identified with it, that was fueling it. So the consciousness that had created this dream-like figure or self stepped out of it. And so I realized, yes, I was two, the self and I, but only one was real. And so the consciousness that I am was real, and the unreal was no longer being sustained by my identification with it. I'm explaining it now, but I couldn't have explained it then. It just happened. It took several years, I don't know how many, maybe at least 7 or 8 years before I could have explained it in the way in which I'm explaining it now. And the next morning I awoke. At first I didn't even remember what happened in the night. So my eyes opened, and the first impression was of everything being fresh and new around me. Or it was the old familiar room. Everything felt alive. Everything was amazing, and even simple objects, their very presence was lovely to look at. The light coming through the curtains, I knew it was alive. And most important of all, it's a deep sense of peace inside. So I was looking at everything through the peace. And I thought, wow, it's wonderful. And I picked some things up and looked as if I'd been born into this world for the first time. And of course I can give an additional explanation now, which I couldn't have done then. I wasn't bringing the past into my sense perceptions. There was just the sense perception without the labeling of the sense perception. There was just a peaceful background to it. And I wasn't calling it anything. It wasn't the old familiar objects in the room, because the old familiar self wasn't there anymore. There was only consciousness there, a field of consciousness.
Very young, about 10 years old, I started learning dancing from Uday Shankar Indian Culture Center, Uday Shankar. And I used to perform right up to 1962. During that period, when I used to practice, I used to lose contact with time, place and object and environment. Music has a great power. It's the greatest power which man has discovered. We should make use of it. Through kirtan, you can reach the highest pinnacle of spiritual experience. Neither by yoga nor by any other means, but by kirtan alone, you can have the vision of divine. You can have the vision of yourself. You can have the vision of God. You can have the vision of Christ. You can have vision of Mary. You can have vision of Krishna. You can have vision of Rama. It is possible. Music does the most important groundwork. By taking away the self from you, right?
Just waking, opening my eyes, looking around the room, and everything seemed fresh and new. The light coming through the curtains, the simplest objects lying in the table had a certain presence, a benign, wonderful presence to them. Everything I acknowledged, and it was lovely. And there was this underlying peace. And I said, what is this? And then I was living in London at the time. I got on a bus, even going through central London on a bus. Everything seemed so peaceful. All the people running around the city, everything was so peaceful. I said, this is so strange. And then I bought a notebook and I started a diary, and I started with this first entry was, I don't know what happened to me, but it's something weird. I just have to write this down in case I lose it again. But somehow it stayed with me. It didn't, the intensity had variations in it of the piece, but basically there was always, since then, always some piece in the background of my life. So that was a shift in consciousness. And much later, when I started to investigate other spiritual traditions, Buddhism and mystical Christianity, Gnosticism, Sufism, Zen Buddhism, also the great Hindu teachers, gradually I began to understand that what happened to me, they call awakening or spiritual awakening. And so the understanding wasn't there. There was just the experience of it at first.
During that period, when I used to practice, I used to lose contact with time, place and object and environment.
Και αυτή η ανάληψη προς τα πάνω είναι η έκρηξη της αντιβαρύτητας μέσα σου. Τα δύο αυτά είναι εκφράσεις, περιγραφές για το ίδιο πράγμα. Αυτό που βίωσα λοιπόν ήταν η έκρηξη της ψυχής μου προς τα πάνω. Ήταν σαν να ακυρώθηκε, μάλλον σαν να αντιστράφηκε η βαρύτητα και σαν να άνοιξε, ας πούμε, όπως ανοίγει η γη και σε καταπίνει, ξαφνικά γίνεται ένας σεισμός, ανοίγει η γη και σε καταπίνει, λέμε έτσι, και πέφτεις. Ή πέφτεις, ξέρω εγώ, από ένα κτίριο ή οτιδήποτε. Πέφτεις. Με τον ίδιο, αυτό ακριβώς συνέβη, με τη διαφορά ότι ανέβηκα. Αυτό δεν είναι μια εμπειρία αστρικής προβολής, αστρικού ταξιδιού. Γιατί εκεί, όταν φεύγεις, όταν βγαίνεις από το σώμα, συνεχίζει να υπάρχει ένας πόλος έλξης προς τα κάτω. Ανεβαίνεις μεν προς τα πάνω, αλλά αργά. Δεν ανεβαίνεις σαν να πέφτεις προς τα πάνω, με όλη τη δύναμη της βαρύτητας. Δεν σε τραβάει το πάνω όπως σε τραβάει το κάτω όταν, ας πούμε, πέσεις από ένα κτίριο κάτω. Αυτή είναι η διαφορά, ότι απλώς επιπλέεις στον αέρα και ανεβαίνεις σιγά σιγά. Ενώ στην εμπειρία που διηγούμε, πέφτεις προς τα πάνω με τρομακτική ταχύτητα. Κατ' ουσίαν μετατρέπεσαι σε φως, μετατρέπεσαι σε μια ενέργεια η οποία διατρέχει το σύμπαν με τη ταχύτητα της σκέψης, πηγαίνοντας κατακόρυφα προς τα πάνω. Προς τα πάνω δεν είναι μεταφορά, είναι κυριολεξία. Ανεβαίνεις προς τα πάνω. Τώρα, τι είναι πάνω και κάτω? Στην εμπειρία μας υπάρχει πάνω και κάτω. Όταν πέφτεις, δεν πέφτεις προς τα κάτω. Όταν φύγεις από το πεδίο της βαρύτητας, όταν φύγεις από το πεδίο έλξης της βαρύτητας, τότε μπορείς να πεις πια ότι δεν υπάρχει πάνω και κάτω για σένα. Αλλά μέχρι τότε, μέχρι να νικήσεις τη βαρύτητα, υπάρχει βαρύτητα και αντιβαρύτητα. Λοιπόν, αυτό που έζησα είναι η αντιβαρύτητα. Και συνέχισα να διατρέχω έτσι το σύμπαν και καθώς το διέτρεχα ήμουν το σύμπαν. Ήμουν ένα με το σύμπαν. Ήμουν η ενέργεια του σύμπαντος, η οποία εξεράγει. Και συνέχισα να διατρέχω έτσι το σύμπαν και καθώς το διέτρεχα ήμουν το σύμπαν. Ήμουν ένα με το σύμπαν. Ήμουν η ενέργεια του σύμπαντος, η οποία εξεράγει. Και καθώς διέτρεχα το σύμπαν για ένα γήινο χρόνο, ας πούμε, πες μερικά δευτερόλεπτα, 7-10 δευτερόλεπτα πες. Δεν έχεις εκείνη τη στιγμή αίσθηση του γήινου χρόνου για να το μετρήσεις, γιατί εκείνη τη στιγμή ο νους σου μετράει αιώνες. Δηλαδή καθώς τρέχεις μες στο σύμπαν, κινείσαι συγχρόνως και στον χρόνο. Και ο χρόνος αυτός είναι ο συμπαντικός χρόνος. Και αυτό που γίνεται είναι ότι γυρίζεις προς την αρχή της ύπαρξης, της δημιουργίας του σύμπαντος. Δηλαδή φεύγεις προς την αρχή του χρόνου.
I used to lose contact with time, place and object and environment.
I'm just bursting. In 6 weeks' time, everything about me changed so dramatically. And I just lost the sense of time. I actually thought it's 2 minutes, but 7 hours had gone by. I'm sitting right there, fully alert, but I have no sense of time.
I was looking at my hand like this, but it was seen that there's nobody in them. I don't know if you understand what that means. You see, there was no feeling of who it is. So this one who is talking and suffering, and I don't know how much longer I can go, does not exist. It never existed. It's only apparent, a dream.
I had been identified throughout my life with an unhappy mind-made entity consisting of self-images and ideas and self-talk in the mind. Self kind of dissolved, that because I must have withdrawn completely my identification with it. So I stepped out of the mind-created self, and what remained was myself as consciousness, but not as the unhappy me. And so the unhappy me began to get shaky, and then something happened to it. It must have, in its final stages, I think there was I felt almost disappearing into some black hole, because it was a kind of death experience. It was the death of the unhappy me. And so the perception of that, it wasn't so much visual as more like a feeling that I was disappearing into some hole. And there was still some fear left there, anxiety of what's happening to me. And then, but I heard a voice, again, not as an audible voice, but more as a realization, don't resist, or resist nothing, I think it said. And so I just let go, and then a kind of void opened.
And I really thought I was going to die, 100%. As soon as I thought, okay, I'll die now, all of a sudden I was instantly in a different, I don't even know what to call it, different dimension. I wasn't aware of my body anymore, absolute darkness, total infinity of black. And I wasn't even there anymore.
He say, if you wish to find the truth, you must vanish. If you want to find the truth, you must disappear. And in 1 second, something, everything I thought that my mind, the world my mind had made up, vanished in an instant. And the one I thought I was not there.
By taking away the self from you, right?
Every cell that is occupied by the self is one less cell that can be occupied by God.
There's some other means to really transform their consciousness and have insight into its intrinsic selfless nature.
Στο Ινδικό έπος Μαχαμπαράτα, ο αφηγητής καταγράφει τα μυρολόγια που συντροφεύουν το βασιλιά Ντουριόντανα τις τελευταίες στιγμές της ζωής του. «Μεγάλε βασιλιά, πού είναι τώρα το λευκό σου αλεξιβρόχι, πού είναι τάχα η μισόβη σου η φιλντισένια και το φορείο σου με τις μεταξωτές κουρτίνες, πού είναι τα μαρμαρένια σου λουτρά και στολισμένες σου χορεύτριες. Τώρα στο χώμα κοίτασε λαβωμένος θανάσιμα με ματωμένους τους μυρούς, μονάχος μες στη νύχτα. Στα χέρια σου γυαλίζει το αίμα και η λάσπη. Δεν σου απομένει πια παρά μια στάλα μοναχά ζωής. Λιγμοί ταράζουν το κορμί σου και αίμα πηχτό αδιάκοπα ξερνάς. Πού είναι τα αρματά σου τα στολισμένα με σμαράγδια, πού είναι τα χωριά σου, τα παλάτια, τα χαρέμια σου, πού είναι 300.000 καβαλάριδες και 800.000 πολεμικοί ελέφαντες. Τα όρνια σημώνουν πεινασμένα για να σπαράξουν το κορμί σου, κοπάδια ίενες και λύκοι πλησιάζουν. Μάταια τεινάζεις τα χέρια τα ματοβαμμένα για να τα διώξεις. Άκου, οι γήπες τεινάζουν τα φτερά τους. Απόψε οι σάρκες σου θα τους θρέψουν. Μεγάλε βασιλιά, εσύ που τη γη ολάκερη κυβερνούσες, εσύ που με το ρόπαλό σου το χρυσό οδηγούσες τόσους και τόσους βασιλιάδες, τώρα δεν θέλεις να πιστέψεις πως οδεύεις στο δρόμο του θανάτου. Να πιστέψεις δεν θέλεις πως πεθαίνεις κι εσύ. Το αίμα σου εμποδίζει τη μιλιά, στα μάτια σου γυαλίζει η οργή, η κοφτή σου ανάσα σιγοσβήνει. Ο χρόνος είναι πάνω απ' όλα. Κρίμα σε σένα. Κρίμα στη μάνα σου την καντάρη που γριά πια θα βγει στους δρόμους της ζητιανιάς. Κρίμα και στον τυφλόγερο πατέρα σου. Κρίμα στους φίλους σου. Στους ταπεινούς ανθρώπους που τόσα σου έδωσαν και τώρα θα γυρνούν περιπλανόμενοι σε μια γη όπου χαρά δεν υπάρχει πια. Ο αφηγητής, βλέποντας το βαθύ πόνο των γυναικών που ψάχνουν μέσα στους χιλιάδες νεκρούς για τους δικούς τους άντρες, μιλά για το μυστήριο του θανάτου. Δύο κορμί που επιπλέον στο νερό συναντιούνται στον ωκεανό και ύστερα αμέσως χωρίζουν. Το ίδιο, εσύ και η μητέρα σου, ο αδερφός σου και εσύ, η γυναίκα σου και εσύ, ο γιος σου και εσύ. Τους ονομάζεις γυναίκα, πατέρα, φίλο σου, μα δεν είναι παρά μια τυχαία συνάντηση καθοδόν. Τούτος ο κόσμος είναι μια ρόδα που γυρίζει, ένα πέρασμα στο μεγάλο ωκεανό του χρόνου που κολυμπούν δύο καρχαρίες, τα γυρατιά και ο θάνατος. Τίποτε δεν διαρκεί, ούτε καν το κορμί σου, κανένας δεσμός δεν αντιστέκεται στο χρόνο. Αυτή τη στιγμή δεν βλέπεις τους προγόνους σου και ούτε οι προγονείς σου σε βλέπουν. Δεν βλέπεις ούτε τον ουρανό, μήτε τον κάτω κόσμο. Ποιος φτιάχνει τον άνεμο, τη φωτιά, το φεγγάρι, τον ήλιο, την ημέρα, τη νύχτα, τα ποτάμια, τα αστέρια. Όλα είναι βαλμένα πάνω σε αυτή την πολυπίκυλη δημιουργία που η αιτία της είναι ακατανόητη. Τίποτε δεν μένει, τίποτε δεν ξαναγυρνά. Χαρά, λύπη, όλα είναι κανονισμένα από το πεπρωμένο. Αυτό που ποθείς, το έχεις. Αυτό που δεν ποθείς, το έχεις. Κανείς δεν μπορεί να καταλάβει γιατί. Τίποτε δεν εγγυάται την ευτυχία του ανθρώπου. Πού είμαι? Πού πηγαίνω? Ποιος είμαι? Γιατί? Και για ποιο πράγμα θα έπρεπε να κλαίω?